I did want to say that Heather Coombs is here with her father, and a lot of this story tonight is about Dan Coombs, who was a builder and a city mayor and a city councilman. He was the mayor twice, 1921, 1929, and we're very privileged to have Heather bring her dad here tonight. All right, let's start off. In 1919, the U.S. Congress passed the 18th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Whether it was a mistake or not is debatable. It prohibited the sale and transportation of alcoholic beverages. This, however, did not slow the progress of Culver City. Harry Culver, a native of Nebraska, founded the area in 1913 that was to become the city of Culver City. The city was incorporated on September 20th, 1917, so by the time Prohibition hit, the city was well on its way. Prohibition created the era of the speakeasy, and in 1927, it was reported that there were more than 30,000 speakeasies in the country. Tonight, we will discuss a few of the popular ones along Washington Boulevard from Culver City's historical past. In the end, I want to focus on Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle's Plantation Cafe, which was right across the street from La Bayona School. As you enter the city from the east along Washington Boulevard, first you come across King's Tropical Inn. There's probably a lot of you here who remember that one. It opened its doors in 1926 at 5741 Washington Boulevard, which is the older establishment, and John G. King was the owner and host. The original evidently was destroyed by fire in 1930, and King had to rebuild a new restaurant at 5935 Washington at Adams Boulevard in La Cienega. This is the one I remember as a kid. My dad would take the family there on Sundays to have a fried chicken, and I always got to go to the goldfish pond, and I loved the French dressing. They were my favorites. My dad was from Valley Head, Alabama, and fried chicken was his favorite. King's Restaurant remained very popular through the years and earned the reputation as one of the most successful restaurants in America. It served on average 500,000 customers each year. This would have been a bad day to come for chicken dinner. The flood of 1933, 2 years before I was born. It operated in Culver City until it closed its doors for good on December 15th of 1968. King's Restaurant was demolished shortly after due to damage from the Northridge earthquake. What a shame. Next, as we travel west on Washington Boulevard, you'd see on the right the famous Frank Sebastian's Cotton Club at National and Washington Boulevard. It started as the Green Mill in 1923 and then went on to become Sebastian's Cotton Club in 1926. The Los Angeles-Culver City boundaries were so irregular during this period that they often split the buildings in half, the bar. So they put the cash register on wheels, and it was moved from one side of the bar to the other, depending which police department was raiding the cafe. The Cotton Club went on to become the Casa Mañana. Some of you might remember that one because that was getting up towards the 40s, in 1938. By 1945, the owners of the Casa Mañana, Inc. decided to change the name of the cafe to the Meadowbrook Gardens, and I'm sure a lot of you remember that one. And they moved the Casa Mañana name to a new location on Wilshire Boulevard. Bands such as Count Basie, Harry James, and Artie Shaw, who later married Ava Gardner, not bad for a band leader. They were regular customers at the Meadowbrook during its heyday. After the Meadowbrook closed, the property had a short life as the Zucca Opera House, melodrama, vaudeville, and burlesque theater. After a devastating fire and with no insurance to cover the loss, it closed for good in 1950. We'll do a separate program on Sebastian's Cotton Club and its incarnations at our October meeting, because it's a lot of stuff with the Cotton Club. As we moved further west on Washington Boulevard, there were an abundance of bars, dives, and cafes to suit any taste. We'll cover some of these later in the program. This brings us to the Plantation Cafe. The Plantation Cafe was built in 1926 for Sam Wolfe, an Eastern cafe magnate. After less than 2 years and a fire, Wolf advertised the Plantation Club for a quick sale at the price of $145,000, just about the price of a good Tesla. Dan Combs was the original contractor for the plantation, the Combs family, and also a past mayor in 1921. Dan was now a city trustee of Culver City, which was an early version of the city council. He suggested to a group of investors that they ask celebrity Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle to join them in purchasing the property and renovating it into a first-class nightclub and cafe. But before we go any further about the plantation, let's just examine who Fatty Arbuckle was and why they brought him on board to do the plantation purchase. Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle was born in 1887, the youngest of 9 children, in the small town of Smith Center, Kansas. It was said that he weighed more than 16 pounds at birth. Yeah. Hope weighed 7. I thought that was a lot. The Arbuckle family moved to California when Roscoe was just 2 years old. This move changed everything. By the time Roscoe reached 8 years old, he was working with the Webster Brown Stock Company on stage, carnivals, and in vaudeville. He sang, danced, and honed his talents as a comedian through accidents and mistakes he made while performing live, and the audience loved it. It was written that Roscoe attended La Bayona School during this time. At age 12, Roscoe's mother died, and his alcoholic father abandoned him. This series of tragic events forced young Roscoe to work hard just to survive. In 1904, at age 18, Roscoe was hired by Sid Grauman. Everybody knows Grauman Chinese Theater. He was a theater magnate, and he owned the Unique Theater located in San Francisco. And Roscoe was hired to sing at the theater. This began a long friendship between the two. Arbuckle continued touring on the West Coast, both on the Pantages and the Orpheum Circuit, with a group of performers led by actor Leon Errol. It's written that while touring in Japan and China with the Morosco Burbank Stock Company, Roscoe appeared on stage as the Mikado. That had to be something. One article I found wrote that Arbuckle's singing was so good that when he met Enrico Caruso, the world's famous opera singer, Caruso told him that he should concentrate on his singing instead of the pratfalls, and he could well become the second greatest singer in the world. In 1908, Roscoe married the first of his 3 wives, Minta Durfee. Her parents were also entertainers. That same year, he started his film career as an extra for Selig Polyscope Film Company in Pasadena. He continued to find work in bit parts as an extra until 1913, when he moved to Universal Studios and went to work for Mack Sennett as a Keystone Cop. He was paid $40 a week. This was a very smart and timely move that pushed him to the top. By 1917, he and Minta separated and eventually divorced. His career by now was on fire, and he became so popular that Paramount Studios offered him a contract of $1,000 per day, plus 25% of the profits. That's a lot of money. This salary was unheard of at that time. By 1918, when the First War started, he signed a 3-year deal at Paramount for $3 million, and the money was pouring in. This was another groundbreaking contract that made him the first actor anywhere to make $1 million a year. Arbuckle was quite a large and imposing figure at more than 300 pounds. This earned him the nickname of Fatty, which he hated. It was in his contract, however, that he had to stay above 250 pounds, and also he would receive a bonus if his weight went 50 to 100 pounds over that. He managed to keep his weight around 300 pounds throughout his career. He did discourage anyone from calling him Fatty off screen. Roscoe often said, "I have a name, you know." He also said he would never use his weight to get a laugh. but his fans still called him the Prince of Wales and the Balloon Attic. In the working years following, he worked with all the great stars of the era, including Charlie Chaplin and Mabel Normand, who was one of his favorites. His career flourished. He began writing and directing films and eventually formed his own company with Joseph Schenck. They called it Comique. During this period, Arbuckle is credited with discovering a young and talented deadpan comedian named Buster Keaton. With Joseph Schenck, they did many films together, including The Bellboy at Paramount Studios. Later, around 1960, I worked on the remake of The Bellboy with Jerry Lewis, also on the Paramount lot. Roscoe was on a roll, and it seemed as if he could do no wrong. Then in 1921, it all came to a screeching halt after a wild party in San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel. This resulted in the death of an up-and-coming starlet, Virginia Rapet, and the incarceration of Roscoe Arbuckle. The torrid scandal that followed would take a heavy toll on all concerned. This, however, is another story for another time. After the prolonged scandal, which included 3 court trials, 2 ending in hung jury, Roscoe was finally acquitted on the 3rd trial of all charges and released. His reputation, however, was in a shambles. Roscoe was faced with ruinous legal bills, no work, and a public that was widely convinced of his guilt. He tried to find work everywhere with little success. The newly formed Hollywood Censorship Board ruled that he should never work in the industry again. The ruling was later lifted, but Roscoe Arbuckle remained unofficially blacklisted. He found some work as a director under the pseudonym William Goodrich, which was suggested to him by his friend Buster Keaton. It originally was suggested as Will Be Good. Under this name, he found work on a few films. In 1924, to make ends meet, he went back into vaudeville at the Bandbox Theater in Cleveland, Ohio. It was there he met and hired a young and talented new comedian who would work for cheap. His name was Bob Hope. He mentored this young talent for a long time in his traveling act, and he later told Hope that he should go to Hollywood and try his luck in the movies. We all know how that turned out. Once again, Roscoe's career began to flounder. He eventually ended up traveling to France, where he appeared in a review at a Paris theater. During this engagement, he was booed off the stage by the audience. The scandal had followed him to Europe, and this rejection hit him very hard. With little other prospects for work, he decided it was time to return to the U.S. and try it again. Over the years, there's been a number of screenplays written about Fatty's life, career, and the scandal. At one point, John Belushi, John Candy, and Chris Farley were all considered as possible Fatty Arbuckle portrayers. The film was never made. Sadly, all 3 of these guys have passed on as well at a young age. Now let's get back to our story of the Plantation Club. After returning to the U.S. in 1928, Arbuckle was contacted by Dan Coombs and his associates, who offered him a partnership in the group that would buy the old Plantation Club and create a lavish new nightclub. Arbuckle agreed to be brought on board as the final investor and to use his celebrity status as a selling point for the club's advertising. After all this was in place, contractor Coombs was given the challenge by the group to remodel the old plantation into a spectacular entertainment venue in 30 days. It was a daunting task for the past and future mayor of Culver City. Coombs accepted the challenge. Can you imagine trying to open a bar and cafe this large across from a school? The property, which consisted of an old Southern-style building with great white pillars on a huge lot, 310 feet by 600 feet. Coombs skillfully finished the job in just 28 days. With the help of Cedric Gibbons, who was the head of MGM's art department. Gibbons had worked with Arbuckle on a number of films. One of Fatty's contributions to the preparation of the club's opening was that he insisted that all the waiters had to be as heavy as he was, along with the parking attendants and hat check girls. After all the plump employees were hired, the club was furnished with Cedric Gibbons' personal touches, and they were ready for their opening night. The date for the opening of the Plantation was August 2nd, 1928. It was a star-studded evening, and the list of celebrities was huge, including Charlie Chaplin, Harry Langdon, B.B. Daniels, Harold Lloyd, a huge star in the silent cinema, his good friend Buster Keaton, and the comic genius Ben Turpin. Lou Cody, who was married to Mabel Normand, handled the MC chores along with Fatty, who sang and performed all of his hilarious routines. Western star from Fox Studios, Tom Mix, dressed in cowboy gear, led the Red Nichols and his Five Pennies Orchestra. Mabel Normand, who was not able to attend because of illness, presented Roscoe with a large, life-size figure of himself, all in flowers. I'm sorry I couldn't find a better quality photo, but you get the idea. I mean, that was the toughest thing of this program, was finding decent pictures from way back when, nobody really had a camera. The opening night was a smash hit, and all the top talent in town showed up at the nightclub, either performing on stage or in the audience. A big favorite that night was Al Jolson. It was written that Jack Warner even got up on the stage and sang a duet with Jolson, bringing the audience to their feet. John Barrymore of the Barrymore family, along with favorite young child star Jackie Coogan, did a skit together as well. The Plantation was the best show in town, and all this was happening in our little town of Culver City. The Plantation Cafe became one of the top meeting places for celebrities and non-celebrities alike. People flocked to the club to see their favorite stars and celebrities, dance alongside them, and sit alongside them. Remember now, it's prohibition, so all alcohol was served under the counter in teacups, soft drink bottles, like they do in most of the speakeasies of that era. Customers could also provide their own alcohol and would be sold setups and mixes. A rousing time was had by all. The Henry Halstead Band, Victor Recording Band, played long and loud, so it was no surprise that the complaints from the neighbors started coming in. The city council listened to the complaints from the neighborhood about the noise from the club and the lewd acts they allege were happening in the parking lot. Fatty was in and out of the council chambers and the courts trying to settle up the complaints, which mainly came from Mr. and Mrs. Denver Postal, who lived on Charles Avenue behind the club. Now, research shows us, as a matter of interest, that Denver Postal went on to become a police officer and the chief of police in Culver City. Maybe it was to get back at them, I don't know. The council soon threatened to impose a midnight curfew on all of the clubs in the city limits. This was met with loud protests from both the club owners and the customers. The city of Los Angeles at that time required all of its restaurants and clubs to close at midnight, which is why Culver City became such a popular destination. They could stay open all night, and it's written if you lasted all night, they'd serve you breakfast in the morning. Culver City Mayor Hoke, along with Dan Combs and City Attorney Gillian, decided to make a trip to the club to check out the noise complaints for themselves. The group of city officials arrived at 1 a.m. and found the noise outside was not as bad as they'd feared. Even the bass drum in the band was not that loud, which was one of the main complaints from the neighbors. Fatty said he'd take the drum out of the band, but Mayor Hoke said, a band without a bass drum is not really a band. The group then went outside, and after a few minutes, they all agreed that the noise did not go against city ordinances and that Arbuckle had done a great job to abate the problem. The city council then decided to place all the clubs in the city on probation. Arbuckle's Plantation Club thrived for a short period of time, and bigger and better top-notch entertainers appearing. Until you know what's coming. What happened in 1929? Anybody know? The stock market crashed. People were losing everything, jumping out of windows, committing suicide, and the rest ending up in soup kitchens. Fatty Arbuckle was not going to be exempt from the financial disaster that happened. It seemed like he just couldn't catch a break. The cafe, after being open just about a year, soon found itself empty. Even the rich and famous stayed home and pinched their pennies. Bills were piling up, and Roscoe's situation continued to get worse. The group was forced to auction all the fixtures and equipment in August of 1929. The sale did little to stem the flow of cash, and he was then forced to sell the Plantation Club to famous band leader of the time, George Olson. Olson remodeled and operated the club successfully under his name for 9 more years. He even had a special night to honor Fatty Arbuckle, who happily performed his routines once again in his beloved plantation. Olson sold the Plantation Club in 1938, and it became the Plantation Trailer Court for the next 6 years. Does anybody remember the Plantation Trailer Court? I couldn't find anything on that except the article that stated that. So I'm sticking with it. I couldn't find anything, and so it looked like the property was on a downward slide when at the end of World War II, it was rescued and became a dance hall once more. It was called the Foreman Phillips County Barn Dance, part of a chain of barn dance locations throughout LA County. By the 1960s, the plantation had disappeared, and all that was left was a fascinating part of Culver City history. The property was demolished and developed into what became eventually the headquarters for the NFL and Omega Company and other businesses. There were no remnants of the old plantation left, except the memories of its past. In 1932, Fatty Arbuckle moved to New York and married for a third time. I've skipped the second wife because it was not a lot to it. Things were starting to look up for Fatty with a new wife and an offer of a new feature film contract with Warner Brothers, which he signed on June 29, 1933. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle said, "This is the best day of my life." Sadly, that night, Roscoe died of a heart attack in the arms of his third wife, Addie. He was only 46 years old. His entire estate at this point was valued at $2,000, which was just 2 days' salary for him during his prime. His friends threw him a lavish funeral, and it was attended by a host of celebrities. It's interesting, however, to note that Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and Prohibition both died the very same year. Now, let's cover some of the other bars and clubs operating in Culver City over the years, and also another important business that kept them running, the Pure Ice Company. Pure Ice was located on Ince Boulevard, just south of Washington Boulevard, across from Culver Studios. Pure Ice provided ice to all the bars and businesses in the Culver City area and the residents. It was owned by Wayne and Marie Rozier, who were my godparents. I was born in 1935 on Wesley Street, next door to the Roziers. Paul Jarrett, our postmaster, lived across the street. And the studio, 40-acre Batlot, was at the end of the block. There was allegedly a bar called the Hot Spot, which, according to articles, was owned by two sisters, Gladys and Babe, who were married to local firemen. It was said to be on Washington Boulevard near the Bologna Creek overpass. That's the one up on the top of the frame there. And over here, that's where King's Tropical Inn was. The Bologna Creek ran under Washington Boulevard at this point, and all the really hot bars were going west from the Bologna Creek. It was alleged to be a favorite bar of mobster Mickey Cohen. Maybe that's why I couldn't find a lot on it. Moonlight Gardens is next. A great-looking bar, and I can't find a lot about it either. I did find an ad and postcard for the club that showed it operated between downtown LA and Venice Beach on Washington Boulevard. Yeah. It did say something here about Oriental cuisine. I found no photos for this one, Ford's Castle, which was mentioned in the ad. But anybody remember Ford's Castle on Washington Boulevard near the Moonlight Gardens? I don't know. If I find anything, I'll have it in another meeting. The Hoosegow. What a name. The Hoosegow was at 7732 Washington Boulevard, just west of MGM Studios. The picture you see here was from the late 20s. The Hoosegow had a great theme. They had guys in prison costumes on the roof. This must have been a fun place to drink. Very colorful. The Hideaway Bar was just west of La Cienega on Washington Boulevard, also near the La Bayona Creek location, which we saw earlier. Maybe the same location as the hotspot. I don't know. Can't find anything on these bars except the fact they existed. Now we come to the Retake Room, located on Washington Boulevard across the street from St. Augustine's Church. It's in the background of all my wedding pictures. This now is currently MGM's Thalberg parking lot. The Retake Room was a favorite of the MGM crowd, and especially Frank Sinatra, who was, among others, was a regular customer. When the bar was closed to construct the executive parking lot, Sinatra is said to have helped his friend Dominic Zangari, who was the bartender there, to open a new bar and restaurant appropriately named Dominic's. It was located in Rancho Mirage, not far from the Sinatra compound, and it became Frank's new watering hole. When we lived in Palm Desert, my wife and I were big customers. We were big at Dominic's restaurant, went there a lot. After Sinatra's death in 1998 and Dominic's passing in 2007, the restaurant closed for good. The Alibi Room started as the Glen Ray Cafe, which was across the street from the studio back gate on Culver Boulevard, which is now the Backstage. The Cinema Bar and many other establishments were very popular then and still are today. A program about bars and dives in Culver City would not be complete without covering what would become Big Ed's Bar. The long road to Big Ed's started in 1927 as the Kemp Drugstore. The Kemp Drugstore is right here on the corner, right there, Kemp Drugstore. This is Washington Boulevard. Archaeopathy is across the street, and the Culver Hotel is just to the left of the policeman there. Also, this was the Adams Hotel on the corner, and this over here is where Mel Brooks' office is, and also Culver City Studios. In 1944, the drugstore was converted into Frank's Restaurant and Lounge, and it was one of 8 cocktail lounges in Culver City within a block of the Archaeopathy Studios. Culver City Council member and retired police officer Ron Perkins said it appeared the city was nothing but gas stations and bars. After operating as Frank's Restaurant and Lounge, it went through a series of bar names like Frank's Playroom, which was still a part of Frank's Restaurant. Sarna's 2, remember that? On the corner. And others. The bar was one of the few remaining places in town that played host to gambling, bookmaking, drinking, and carousing. After World War II, the city population soared, and so did the bars. I've heard a lot of stories over the years about the wild times that occurred at this bar. It's said to be a Damon Runyon type bar, and you older people know who Damon Runyon is, and had a lot of characters. As Frank's Bar, it was owned by a man named Frank Calagnini. Can't find any information on Frank. I even went to the Culver City Police Department. I says, have you got any pictures of Chief Postal? No. Have you got any pictures of Big Ed Schwartz? No. Have you got any pictures of Frank Calagnini? So evidently they didn't break any laws, but they did own bars. It was very popular with the film industry and was used in many films and TV shows because of its close location to the studios. An article from the LA Times in the 50s told how Howard Hughes, who owned RKO Pathé Studios, was a regular, along with Johnny Weissmuller, who starred in the Jungle Gym TV series across the street at RKO. It was written that Frank Calagnini would often drink with the celebrity customers. Frank said that Weissmuller wasn't much of a drinker. 4 or 5 beers and he was finished. The Times article stated that after 2 in the morning, some of the customers would retreat to the basement for after-hours drinking and gambling. An old customer wrote on the internet that the bar had transitioned to Sarna's 2 by this time and had a few loyal customers. They would show up at 6 in the morning and they managed to crawl out the door at 2 a.m. He said it was very dark inside, and if you ran your fingers over the walls and the molding, you'd come away with years of dirt and grime. Chief of Police Hildebrand, who was our chief from 1950 to 1956, admitted that there was a lot of gambling and prostitution going on at the bar and other bars across the city. What did they call the Adams Hotel? Ed's Beds, because it was right above Ed's Bar, and so they called it Ed's Beds because it had short-term rental. Rentals by the hour. In 1960, the bar was taken over by Big Ed Schwartz. Now, Big Ed was a large man. He was 6'5" with his cowboy boots on. He sported a white goatee, a string tie, and a gold necklace and bifocals. What a sight. I mean, it's amazing. I looked everywhere, police department, everywhere. I could not find a picture of Big Ed Schwartz. Somebody's got one somewhere. And what a shame. He said that the bar was pretty rough when he took it over, and he tried hard to clean it up. It took him a year to finally get it into shape. He said there were many sad stories coming out of that bar. He added that people didn't just come here to get drunk. They were mostly just very lonely. Ed had one customer tell him, this one got me, when I die, I want it to be here. Many TV and film companies have used this corner with our Culver City Hotel and Big Ed's in the background for filming, including Starsky and Hutch. One of the last films to be shot at the bar was Barfly, shot in 1986, starring Mickey Rourke and Faye Dunaway. It seemed the perfect place to make a movie like this and a fitting end to a legendary Big Ed's bar. Ed did admit, however, that he made more money renting the bar to the studios for filming than he did off the customers drinking. Big Ed closed for good and was demolished along with the Adams Hotel, Ed's Beds, shortly after the Barfly completed filming, making way for a new development, Parcel B, currently the Culver Steps. The end of an era and the beginning of another. The downtown area of Culver City is now loaded with great restaurants and great bars, including our beautifully remodeled Culver Hotel and Lobby Bar. All of these establishments are frequented by local customers and our working community from Culver Studios, Amazon, Apple, Warner Discovery, HBO, and many other high-tech and gaming firms. People come from all over, including Beverly Hills, just to eat and drink in Culver City. Well, this gives you a little small taste of what it was like going down the line without keeping you until your seat gets hard. And it wasn't a quiet, sleepy little town with tree-lined streets that everybody thought. It did have its moments and its places that did bring some attention. And in closing, I'd like not to go home without acknowledging one other historical landmark, Stern's Barbecue. It was also on Washington Boulevard, which I call the Street of Dreams. I still miss Stern's, and I bet a lot of you have fond memories about it. Maybe a future program. I don't know. What do you think? Anyway, I thank you for showing up at our program. I hope you lived through it. And forgive me for my few mistakes.
My grandfather lived at the trailer park
Oh, okay.
after he
So
moved
it-
off of Charles Avenue and
Yes.
out of town.
Yeah, Charles Avenue is right behind where Arbuckle's was. So it was a trailer park.
Question back here, Dennis.
Yes.
Where was the Stearns Barbecue?
Stearns Barbecue was down Washington Boulevard because Culver City only owned the frontage on Washington Boulevard. Everything behind the frontage was LA City. So it was down where Washington and Washington Place split, right there on the left-hand side. There was a motel also there, Stearns Motel. Any other questions? Oh, thank Hope? My wife says I have to thank
Back
Hope.
here, Dennis.
One more question.
I'm her father. She should thank me.
Dennis,
I thank my daughter for dragging me into the Culver City Historical Society because it's been a great run. I've enjoyed it. It's been, I don't know how much longer I can last, but if we make it through the Cotton Club program in October, it'll be hip hip and hooray.
Dennis, back here.
one more question. Do you remember the Culver House?
Yes. I don't remember
A lot of movie stars went in there.
Yes, and the Culver House, in the article I read, the Culver House and Big Ed's used to have foot races in the alley behind, and Big Ed's always won, according to the article.
Hey, Dennis, thanks for the great program. I absorbed every minute. There was not one boring bit. I just wondered, I always forget about this. I know there was that kind of underground alleyway kind of near the Culver
Yes,
Hotel.
went across to the hotel.
Was that related to speakeasies or something else? I
Had
always
nothing
forget.
to do with the speakeasies.
Nothing to do.
It was an
Okay.
underpass because Washington Boulevard was a very busy street. And I took that thing many, many times because I worked at the Star News, which is just up the street by Linwood House.
Oh, really?
And I used to go, it was just a safe way to get the midgets and everybody else that worked on pictures and at the other hotels, the West End and some of the other hotels,
Okay.
safely across to the Culver
Thank you.
Hotel. No, had nothing to do with it. Is that it?